Have you not heard of Janadatta in Shravasti, who on impulse one morning held a mirror to his face and fell in love with the head in the mirror? He gazed at the eyes and eyebrows, but got angry because he could not see his own face. He decided he must be a Lee ghost. Having lost all his bearings, he ran madly out. What do you think? Why did this person set out on a mad chase for no reason? Purna said that person was insane. There's no other reason. The Buddha said, what reason can you give for calling forms the wonderful enlightened bright perfection, the fundamentally perfect bright wonder? If there is a reason, then how can you say it is false? On your own false thinking becomes in turn the cause for more. From confusion, you accumulate confusion through kampa after kampa. Although the Buddha is aware of it, he cannot counteract it. From such confused causes, the cause of confusion perpetuates itself. When one realizes that confusion has no cause, the falseness becomes baseless. Since it never arose, why would you hope for its extinction? One who obtains bodhi is like a person who awakens to realize the events of a dream. Even though his mind is awake and clear, he cannot get hold of the things in the dream and physically display them. How much the more is that the case with something which is without a cause and basically non-existent, such as Janadatta's situation that day in the city. Was there any reason why he became fearful for his head and went running about? If his madness were suddenly to cease, it would not be that he had obtained his head from some place outside, and so, before his madness ceases, how can his head have been lost? Purna, falseness is the same way. How can it exist? All you need to do is not follow discriminations, because none of the three causes arises when the three conditions of the three continuities of the world, living beings and karmic retribution, are cut off. Then the madness of the Janadatta in your mind will cease of itself, and just that ceasing is Bodhi. The supreme, pure, bright mind originally pervades the Dharma realm. It is not something obtained from anyone else. Why then labor and toil with marrow and joy to cultivate and be certified? This is to be like a person who has a wish-fulfilling pole sewn in his clothing without realizing it. Thus he roams abroad in a state of poverty, begging for food and always on the move. Although he is indeed destitute, the pole is never lost. Suddenly a wise person shows him the pole. All his wishes are fulfilled. He obtains great wealth, and he realizes that the pearl did not come from somewhere outside. Ananda then bowed at the Buddha's feet, arose at the great assembly, and said to the Buddha, Wound Honored One now explains that when the three conditions of the karma of killing, stealing, and lust are cut off, the three causes for them do not arise. Then the madness of Janadatta in the mind ceases of itself, and just that ceasing is Bodhi. It is not something obtained from anyone else. This clearly of causes and conditions. Why then does the thirst come one abruptly reject causes and conditions? It was through causes and conditions that my mind became enlightened, world honored one. And that is not only true of us who are young in years, of us Southerners who still have to study. Mahamaugalyayana, Shariputra, and Saputi, who are now in this assembly and who followed the elder Brahmans, became enlightened and obtained the state of no outflows upon hearing the Buddha expound upon causes and conditions. Now you say that Bodhi does not come from causes and conditions, so the spontaneity that must carry Goshaliputra and others advocated in Rajagriha then becomes the primary meaning. I only hope you will let fall great compassion and break through my confusion. The Buddha said to Ananda, let us take the case of Janadatta in the city. If the causes and conditions of his madness cease, the nature that is not mad will spontaneously come forth. The entire principle of spontaneity and causes and conditions is nothing more than that. Ananda, Janadatta's head was spontaneously there. It was a spontaneous part of him. There was never a time when it was not. Why, then, did he suddenly fear that he had no head and start running about madly? If he naturally had a head and went mad due to causes and conditions, would it not be just as natural for him to lose his head due to causes and conditions? Basically, his head was not lost. The madness and fear arose from falseness. There was never any change that took place. Why then labor the point about causes and conditions? If the madness was spontaneous, the madness and fear would be fundamental. Before he went mad, then where was his madness hidden? If the madness were not spontaneous, and his head were in fact not lost, why did he run about in a state of madness? If you realize that you have a head and recognize the madness of your pursuit, then both spontaneity and causes and conditions become idle theories. That is why I say that the three conditions ceasing to be is itself the body mind. The body mind being produced and the mind subject to production and extinctions being extinguished is simply production and extinction. The ending of both production and extinction is the effect this way. If there is spontaneity, then clearly it must be that the thought of spontaneity arises and the mind subject to production and extinction ceases. That then is still production and extinction. To call the lack of production and extinction spontaneity is the same as to say that the single substance formed by the combination of all mundane appearances is a mixed and united essence, and that whatever is not mixed and united is basically spontaneous in nature. When spontaneity is devoid of spontaneity and mixing and uniting are devoid of their unifying qualities, so that spontaneity and unity alike are abandoned, and both the abandonment of them and their existence cease to be. That is no idle theory. Bodhi and Nirvana are still so far away that you must undoubtedly pass through compass of bitterness and diligence before you consummate them and are certified. You can hold in memory the 12 divisions of the sutras spoken by the Buddhas of the 10 directions, and their pure, wonderful principles as many as the sands of the river Ganges, but it only aids straw idle theorizing. You can discuss causes and conditions and spontaneity and understand them perfectly clearly, and people in the world refer to you as the one foremost in learning. You have spent eons upon eons saturating yourself with learning, yet you could not avoid the difficulty of Mantaji. Why did you have to wait for me to use the spiritual mantra of the Buddha's summit? The fire lost in Mantaji's daughter's heart died instantly, and she attained the position of an anagami. Now she is one of a vigorous group in my Dharma assembly. The river of love dried up in her, and she was able to set you free. Therefore, Ananda, your ability to keep in mind the third command's wonderful secret teachings of aeon after aeon is not as good as a single day of no outflow cultivation that is intent upon getting far away from the two worldly sufferings of love and hate. In Mantaji's daughter, a former prostitute, love and desire were dispelled by the spiritual power of the mantra. Now her name in Dharma is Bhikshuni Netra. Shri and Rahula's mother, Yashodhara, both became aware of their past causes and knew that for many kalpas they had endured the suffering of greed and love. Because they single-mindedly became permitted with the cultivation of the goodness of no outflows, they were both freed from their bonds and received predictions. Why then do you cheat yourself and still remain caught up in looking and listening? When Ananda and the Great Assembly heard the Buddha's instruction, their doubts and delusion were dispelled. Their minds awakened to the actual appearance. They experienced light ease both physically and mentally, and they obtained what they had never had before. Once again he wept, bowed at the Buddha's feet, knelt on both knees, placed his palms together, and said to the Buddha, "The unsurpassed, great, compassionate, pure, and precious King has instructed me well, so that by means of his various causes and conditions, experience and encouragement, all of us who were immersed in the sea of suffering have escaped it." Won't honored one, having heard the sound of Dharma like this, I know that the treasury of the first come one, the wonderful, enlightened, bright mind, pervades the 10 directions and includes the first come one, the lands of the 10 directions, and the pure, precious adornments of the land of the wonderfully enlightened King. Yet the first come one once again admonishes that erudition is of no merit and is not as good as cultivation. So now I am like a wanderer who suddenly encounters a reigning king who bestows upon him an elegant house. He has obtained a mansion, but there needs to be a door in order for him to enter it. I only hope the first come one will not withhold his great compassion in instructing those of us in the assembly who are covered over by darkness, so that we may renounce the small vehicle and attain at last the first come one's nirvana without residue, the fundamental path of resolve, and that he will enable those who still must study to know now how to subdue the age-old seeking of advantage from conditions, to obtain dharani, and to enter into the knowledge and vision of the Buddha. Having said this, he made a full prostration, and together with the members of the assembly, he single-mindedly awaited the Buddha's compassionate instruction. The world-honored one then took pity on the sound hearers and the conditioned enlightened ones in the assembly, all those who were not yet at ease with the Bodhi mind, and on all living beings to come after the Buddha's extinction during the Dharma ending age. He revealed the wonderful path of cultivation of the unsurpassed vehicle. He proclaimed to Ananda and to the great assembly, "If you want to have a decisive resolve for Bodhi and not grow weary of the wonderful samadhi of the Buddha, the first come one, you must first understand the two resolutions regarding initial resolve for enlightenment." What are the two resolutions regarding initial resolve for enlightenment? Ananda, the first resolution is this: if you wish to renounce the position of sound hearer and cultivate the Bodhisattva vehicle, and to enter the knowledge and vision of the Buddha, you must carefully consider whether the resolve on the cause ground and the enlightenment on the ground of fruition are the same or different. Ananda, it is impossible while on the cause ground to use the mind subject to production and extinction as the basis for cultivating in quest of the Buddha vehicle, which is neither produced nor extinguished. For this reason, you should realize that all existing dharmas in the material world will decay and disappear. Ananda, contemplate the world. What thing is there that will not waste away? But has anyone ever heard of the disintegration of the void? Why not? It is because the void does not exist, and so it can never be destroyed. Why you are in your body? What is solid is of earth, what is moist is of water, what is warm is of fire, and what moves is of wind. Because of these four bonds, your tranquil and perfect, wonderfully enlightened, bright mind divides into seeing, hearing, sensation, and cognition. From beginning to end, there are the five layers of turbidity. What is meant by turbidity? Ananda, pure water, for instance, is fundamentally clear and clean, whereas dust, dirt, ashes, silt, and the like are basically solid substances. Such are the properties of the two. Their natures are not compatible. Suppose then that an ordinary person takes some dirt and tosses it into the pure water. The dirt loses its solid quality and the water is deprived of its transparency. The cloudiness which results is called turbidity. Your five layers of turbidity are similar to it. Ananda, you see that emptiness pervades the 10 directions. There is no division between emptiness and seeing. However, although emptiness has no substance and your seeing has no awareness, the two become entangled in a falseness. This is the first layer called the turbidity of time. Your body appears in form with the four elements composing its substance, and from this, seeing, hearing, sensation, and cognition become firmly defined. Water, fire, wind, and earth fluctuate between sensation and cognition and become entangled in a falseness. This is the second layer called the turbidity of views. Further, the functions of memory, discrimination, and verbal comprehension in your mind bring into being knowledge and views. From out of them appear the six defiling objects. Apart from the defiling objects, there are no appearances. Apart from cognition, they have no nature, but they become entangled in a falseness. This is a third layer called the turbidity of afflictions. And then, day and night, there is endless production and extinction as your knowledge and views continually wish to remain in the world, while your karmic patterns constantly move you to various places. This entangle becomes a falseness, which is the fourth layer called the turbidity of living beings. Originally, your seeing and hearing were not different natures, but a multitude of defiling objects has divided them until suddenly they became different. Their natures have a mutual awareness, but their functions are in opposition. Sameness and difference arise and they lose their identity. This entanglement becomes a falseness, which is the fifth layer called the turbidity of the lifespan. Ananda, you now want to cause your seeing, hearing, sensation, and cognition to return to and tally with the permanence, bliss, true self, and purity of the thirst come one. You should first decide what the basis of birth and death is by relying on the perfect tranquil nature, which is neither produced nor extinguished. By means of this tranquility, shun the empty and false production and extinction, so that they are subdued and return to the source of enlightenment. The attainment of this source of bright enlightenment, which is neither produced nor extinguished, is the mind on the course ground. Then you can completely accomplish the cultivation of and certification to the ground of fruition. It is like purifying muddy water by placing it in a quiet vessel which is kept completely still and unmoving. The sand is sealed and settled, and the pure water appears. This is called the initial subduing of the guest dust affliction. The complete removal of the mud from the water is called the eternal severance of fundamental ignorance. When clarity is pure to its essence, then no matter what happens, there is no affliction. Everything is in accord with the pure and wonderful virtues of Nirvana. The second resolution is this: if you definitely wish to bring forth the resolve for Bodhi and to be especially courageous and dedicated in the cultivation of the Bodhisattva vehicle, you must decisively renounce all conditioned appearances. You should carefully consider the origin of affliction and the beginningless creation of karma and perpetuation of rebirth, who creates it and who endures it. Ananda, if in your cultivation of Bodhi you do not carefully consider the origin of affliction, you cannot realize the empty falseness of the sense organs and sense objects or the location of delusion. If you don't even know its location, how can you subdue it and reach the level of the third come one? Ananda, consider the ordinary person who wants to untie a knot. If he can't see where the knot is, how can he untie it? But I have never heard that one can obliterate empty space. Why? It is because the emptiness has no form or appearance. Therefore, there are no knots to untie. But now your visible eyes, ears, nose, and tongue, as well as your body and mind, are like 6 thieving matchmakers who plunder the jewels of your household. And thus, from beginningless time, living beings and the world have been bound up together so that the material world cannot be transcended. Ananda, what is meant by the time and space of living beings? Time refers to change and flow. Space refers to location. You should know by now that north, east, southwest, northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest, above and below are space. Past, present, and future are periods of time. There are 10 directions in space and 3 periods of time. All living beings come into being because of false interaction. Their bodies go through changes and they are caught up in time and space. However, although there are 10 directions in space, those known in the world as north, south, east, and west are the only ones that can be clearly fixed. Above and below have no position. The intermediates have no definite direction. Determined clearly to be 4 in number, they are then combined with the 3 periods of time, 3 times 4, or alternately 4 times 3 make 12.